So in the 1990s, at Sesshin here at Samish, Norman was the only priest. So he was in the Zendo a lot more than some of us who've been at recent years might recall. Because, he was the only one who could be officiating and doshiat service, and he gave all the talks, which he did pretty much all the years. Or a few years later, we're not there yet, a few years later, where we gave an additional talk in the evening. Some of the senior students did. And I kind of suspect, but I don't really remember, that maybe he would just sit and settle the room for a day or so before going off to Dokusan, because there were only 25 of us, 30 of us, so he wouldn't go straight to sit in his Dokusan hut for 7 days straight from morning to night, which he did in later years. And we would always be astounded that he could do that, and he would always be like, yeah, no, it's a privilege, no problem. The group maybe grew a little bit slowly over the 90s. I don't have data that I could find. It might be when John and I go through the paper files, we'll see some old registration lists on paper, because everything, of course, was on paper. And it was absolutely an international group. While there were, at this point, weekly sitting groups going steadily in Bellingham and Vancouver, when Norman came to town, it was one Sangha, for sure. Almost everybody involved would cross the border in whichever direction they needed to cross it to go to the retreat. And this was not just before Trump, it was also before 9/11. And I think for most of us, the border crossing seemed like no big deal, maybe a little delay. No risk to life or liberty. Which we believe is why there are not so many Canadians in the room at the moment. Makes sense. But you pretty much always see at every retreat people, maybe you know some of these names, Kate and Michael, who were the teachers in the North now, Rick Spencer, who passed this year, sadly, if you haven't heard, lung cancer. And other committed Canadians like Claire Talbot, Dan and Martha Cheslook, Flo, Susan Elby, along with the Bellingham regulars. And back to the first year, I remembered one infamous thing that happened. And it stemmed from an experience I'd had at San Francisco Zen Center. I found it so helpful when I was at Sesshin in San Francisco that I had a couple of roommates. I would really watch these guys, and I felt like I learned something about how to be at Sesshin. Just watching them go about their business, brush their teeth, get dressed and stuff. And I came here thinking, wow, it's good, that's right. Yeah, you should have a roommate at Sesshin. It really helps you. And so even though we were surrounded by 47 rustic cabins and there were only like 20 of us, I insisted that everyone needed a roommate. To my amazement now, they went along with us. Maybe people were sneaking out to sleep in the next door cabin, if they were snoring or something. They did, just for 1 year. But I guess these things do give us a good story, can laugh at later and keep alive like all the family stories. I've heard Heidi Epstein tell this story many times. And thinking of Heidi, I don't know how many of us know Heidi Epstein, early student of Norman's, wonderful artist and wise woman, also an architectural designer, so she helped us figure out how to make our temple very generously. And she actually lives right here in the valley. She lives on Beaver Marsh Road, the name of that road. And she was here that first year and for most of the years since. What thinking of Heidi and the roommate story made me remember was that Samish is where we had all the Jukai ceremonies, all the precept ceremonies, which It's when Norman was here and we had time and everyone was gathered. So regardless of where you were from, you'd have your jukai here. We'd have the jukai on Friday afternoon. It's the same week pattern that we have today, on Friday afternoon. And then on Friday evening, we'd have a reception, like a little party. And then on Friday night, the instruction was, okay, now back to silence, go to bed. Because we still had Saturday morning to have zazen and the formal shosan question and answer ceremony. I have many memories of people lingering in the dining room way later than maybe they should, chatting, celebrating Sangha. We did a few things at Sesshin that are unusual for Sesshin that we came to love, and then once we stopped doing that, people were like, oh, darn, we don't have that thing anymore, we don't have that anymore. Just sit here silently all week. But back to Heidi. Heidi was in one of those early Jukai cohorts and has remained a close student of Norman's ever since. Chris was sharing that they just had a retreat with Norman in California, and Heidi, who's now in her 80s, sat the whole Sesshin, every period. So Heidi and her husband Mark had a daughter. And when their daughter was maybe 16 or 17, the thing that all parents fear the most happened. She was killed in a car crash. And I think this was a big thing that brought her to practice, Heidi, that she spoke about with Norman when they met. So when Heidi was preparing for Jukai, she didn't just sew a rakusu for herself. She sewed one for her daughter also. And as Norman prepared all the usual materials, this is kind of a big ceremony, you get special stuff, acknowledges you're joining the lineage and being a Buddhist or a Zen person or something. You get a name. It's a big deal ceremony. As Norman prepared all the usual materials for Heidi, he also prepared all of them for her daughter. Did the calligraphy on her daughter's rakusu, made her lineage paper, gave her a name, and welcomed her into Buddha's family. I don't remember, but I suspect he probably spoke to her directly during the ceremony. Made me cry, remembering about this all these years later. Well, what a brilliant and touching idea Norman had. I wonder how he thought of that. Or maybe Heidi thought of that. So, and maybe we'll get to see Heidi. She sometimes comes to the talks. Maybe we'll get to see her. I hope so. So the 1990s here were an important place for these emerging sanghas, which were also one sangha. And of course, we had our challenges. What group of humans doesn't have that? Stuff to work on and learn from together. Norman cleverly stayed at a distance for most of that stuff, let us work it out, like a wise parent, One thing I remember that's kind of cute is there was a keen competition every year to get to be Norman's jisha, his assistant. Because you get to follow him around and organizing them interviews and stuff like this. You get a lot of time with him. And, we only saw him a couple times a year. But we were all trying to be good Zen students, and we knew you're not supposed to have preferences. So they would ask to be jisha in really kind of cute little ways, like, just if you haven't thought of anybody yet, As if it wasn't the first thing we thought of every year. Okay, how are we going to do? What are we going to do about Norman's jisha now, this year? And then if they didn't get picked, they'd do their best to not act crushed and heart-fallen. If they didn't get the gig, It was a thing. And it was hard too, How do you decide who to give the golden ticket to, Disappoint everybody else. I suppose that's still true in some ways, and always will be for conditioned humans. The great thing, though, that I love about, time going by is that in retrospect, it's all just kind of cute, So that's good to remember. The thing you're really upset about, maybe it'll be kind of cute in 20 years. Like, oh, jeez, why was I so worried about that? And one of the things I so appreciated in Kanho's talk yesterday, among many things, were her reflection on this idea. These were reflections on this idea we've been saying, that Norman's not here. That's true in a conventional truth kind of way. Norman's body is probably at home in Muir Beach, California right now. I haven't seen him around here. Have you seen him? You never know. But we can for sure, as Chris was saying, this is so true, we can feel his presence here. Even if you never met him, you can feel his presence here. His presence in the practice, his patience, and just his enjoyment of it all. He would always say, I love Sesshin. So nice to get to come to Sesshin. And maybe in there somewhere he'd drop in, yeah, thanks for setting it all up. Norman felt like we didn't have to be too fancy, or elaborate about anything. Having the Zendo in the Christian basketball church was good by him. Although he did and does appreciate the traditional formality of Zen, as he grew up in it, but not for its own sake. That it's really about doing the practice together. It's about the incredible possibility of being together for a week with our hearts open, and to do it in that way. And actually, left to his own devices down in the Bay Area, his retreats there are even simpler than ours. Somebody up here is like more into all this formal stuff. I don't know. And one of the things I appreciate about Norman's understanding is he really knew that life and practice already has enough built-in challenge for us to learn and grow through. We don't need to make anything here difficult, for difficult's sake, which can happen in some places. If you encounter that somewhere else, his coaching to me was, be humble and say thank you. Someone else is like uptight about all this. More opportunities to learn, not be like, well, my teacher's more mellow about this stuff. You shouldn't do it that way. No. In fact, I even think he even told us at one point, that would be really embarrassing to me if you did something like that. So buck up if you end up at some hardcore place. But here we always had a relaxed but serious feeling, I think. I hope. I'd started with pretty much the schedule I remembered from my early time at San Francisco Zen Center. And believe it or not, this is an easier version. I remember from the beginning having the impulse that maybe we shouldn't start at 4:30 a.m. So we started at 5:30. And I do remember Norman a couple years in telling me, actually lighten it a little more. We're sitting all day. It's okay if the zazen periods are a little shorter. They were all 40 minutes, which was the standard I grew up with. So now most of them are 30. We'll get plenty of zazen in, don't worry, he told me. And even back then, he said, some of us are getting older, and that doesn't seem to have stopped happening. And in recent years, we gentled it up even a little bit more. Start time of 6 instead of 5:30. And then for a couple of years, inspired by what I heard about happening in the Bay Area with Norman, We had like some extra time off in the afternoon. That was too much for me, sorry. We still have it. I think the afternoon's okay. I hope. I also remember going many times to see Norman worried about something. Mostly worried about whether everyone was getting what they needed. Like I remember at one point, I was worried that, we don't offer a lot of information for somebody who's never saw Zazen before. We say on there, you should have, gotten some Zazen training somewhere else, but people still come who haven't, So I thought, well, maybe we should have like a little Zazen class and an extra orientation for those people. We'll just fit it in here, and it could be, oh, this is happening, and I had a whole plan in my head, like I tend to. And Norman would always say to me, no, that's okay. It'll be fine. It'll be okay. Keep it simple. Although, as I say that, I know there's a few people here who are pretty new to all this who are like, no, actually, that would have been helpful. But that was Norman's impulse, and why I trust it is this. After having those conversations, every time, I had many different versions of this story, the minute he said, no, it's okay, let's keep it simple, I could just feel the tension drop out of me. I could feel myself relax into a fuller trust of whatever this is we're doing. Trust in everybody to take care of themselves, figure it out, on the practical level. But also just a trust in this process. It's not always obvious how, and it may have its challenges at times, for sure. Good stories for 20 years later, don't forget that. But that the Dharma really does take care of us. And that it helps people, when you're in leadership, you actually can help people often by doing less, not doing more. And recently, I actually heard myself saying much the same thing to someone else about this exact topic. It just goes around. And of course, Norman modeled for us so consistently and steadily, year after year, kindness, compassion, acceptance. That you didn't have to try harder. You didn't have to be perfect. You didn't have to be tougher or smarter. Just be yourself. Just do your best with the body and mind you already have. It's enough that you showed up. It's enough. You are enough. Over the years, he didn't really give me either much criticism or much praise that I can remember. Just a warm kind of acceptance and appreciation. When I'd have the occasional sort of shift or realization or kind of aha thing I wanted to talk to him about, often a little bit excited, he'd pretty much say some version of, oh, that's nice. I remember at least one time I was really excited about something I realized. So he went as far as to say, oh, that's nice. Let's talk about something else now. So it's not about accomplishment, is it? What we're doing here. There's nothing to get. That we are already growing and changing in all the ways that we need to. Just trust this process. So I think, as best I can tell now, these are the gifts from my teacher, from our teacher. Not flashy, but what could be more important? And I suppose it took me some time, some decades, to really recognize these gifts that I was being given and how important they are. And I hope I and we collectively with each other are and will keep offering these same gifts to each other. So, let's get back to Master Dogen. If we ever left him, who knows? Oops. Here's that little handout I gave you. Oh, sorry, Zoomers, I was going to give you a link. I forgot. So, actually, before we crack it open, a couple of thoughts. One is, it was so nice hearing the other text that Dogen wrote just before this one, Kisei Sanshoku, Valley Sounds, Mountain Colors, yesterday, remembering about that, where he was first showing his inspiration from the great Chinese poet Su Dongpo, also called Su Shi. That great poem that we both read, I think, the first couple days. This mountain stream. So imagine yourself sitting in the mountains by a mountain stream. It helps to imagine that. This mountain stream is Buddha's long, broad tongue. This vast mountain is Buddha's formless body. Mountain up there. All night long, listening to 84,000 sutra verses. When the light returns, how will I explain it? So it's all right there, isn't it? And Dogen was obviously inspired by this poem because he actually quotes it in the first piece that Chris was talking about yesterday, and I feel like it's woven all through this piece as well. And I also wonder if Dogen somewhere, first or later, I don't know, ran into these two quotations from Master Dao Kai at the beginning of part 2 in your handout, saying, the green mountains are always walking. Green mountains are always walking. A stone woman gives birth to a child at night. And then also at the beginning of section 6. Yunmen, another great master. So these are great masters from China. Yunmen, great master Guangxian, said, Eastern mountains travel on water. So I don't know. I was imagining Dogen in the middle of the night. We know he kept late hours. I didn't sleep much, actually. And that's part of why we have this incredibly inspired and brilliant, confusing writing, is because he's doing it all sleep deprived. Maybe. I imagine him reading those and maybe the Su Dongpo poems kind of reverberating his mind too, and picking up his brush, and saying, yeah. And just starting on this essay, Jack Kerouac style, but with a brush. Maybe he wrote it in one night. That would fit. All night practicing, listening to 84,000 verses. And, he was the kind of practitioner that would do that, I'm sure. He wouldn't be just like, oh, that's a nice metaphor, I'm going to bed. He'd be like, all right. We do know from the textual history that he produced a lot of these essays in these years, the years around when he wrote this, his late 30s, early 40s. A good third of all of Shobogenzo was written in a fairly compact time. Maybe he was really inspired by these sayings about walking mountains, mountains moving over waters, and this whole thing is a big riff on that. Sometimes people suggest reading Dogen more like poetry and less like prose, which is a good suggestion, I think, right? It kind of gets us out of our head, it's an essay. Where's the premise? What's the first argument? It's like, wait a minute, he's talking about something else, Where's the conclusion? Wait, it was at the beginning. No, wait, So poetry doesn't have that. But it's pretty prosy, too. And the other thing we've learned over the years of Dogen scholarship in the West is Dogen's constantly quoting other teachers, constantly. Sometimes mixed into the text in a way that wasn't even obvious. in the first couple translations. You know, they didn't put quote marks or there's no footnotes in Dogen. You know? So it's also quite scholarly too. So then I realized, no, it's not prose and it's not poetry. It's a riff. It's a riff. And maybe I can't help where I come from. Maybe I'm remembering being out in the woods late at night with my quirky friends when I was younger. Maybe substances might have been involved. No comment. All of us talking constantly, riffing on our lives and the world and trying to understand the world, right? Riffing. That's why you riff. So Dogen was fired up on the Dharma, riffing with us as his buddies, sitting in the circle. So maybe we can enjoy Dogen that way. You know, like with your buddies, it doesn't matter if you space out for a while. You don't like miss anything. You know? You got the gist. It's okay with Dogen too. He doesn't mind. But probably there's also another important element here before we actually get back to the text. Is Dogen's depth of feeling for our lives beyond our ideas of our lives. That's where he's riffing from, right? He's speaking to us from the world beyond concepts and conventions, using the very words that form that world. Speaking to us from the ultimate side, sending us postcards from emptiness with his flowing brush. And not to like show off or anything like that, but to invite us, you know, to invite us there. Come on in. But he knows it's not easy. It's not easy for us. So he shifts back and forth, different ways of expressing, in and out of the relative and the ultimate, giving us another different metaphor, or different image, or different teaching. Which is why sometimes his essays are like, well, how do we get here? Because you missed it last time, buddy. Yeah, that's how you got here. Always encouraging us so strongly to go beyond our usual way of thinking. So thanks, Dogen. Yeah, we appreciate it. It's not easy for us, but you're helping us out. Okay. Let's read section 4, and I'll read everything out loud too, if you don't have the handout. Section 4, page 4. First two paragraphs are: Green mountains thoroughly practice walking, and eastern mountains thoroughly practice traveling on water. So there's those two quotes. Accordingly, these activities are a mountain's practice, keeping its own form without changing body and mind. A mountain always practices in every place. Don't slander by saying that a green mountain cannot walk and an eastern mountain cannot travel on water. When your understanding is shallow, you doubt the phrase, green mountains are always walking. When your learning is immature, you're shocked by the words, flowing mountains. Without fully understanding even the words flowing water, you drown in small views and narrow understanding. Sometimes his encouragement is a little intense. Have you noticed that? Yeah. The second paragraph is all encouraging. So back to the beginning. Green mountains and eastern mountains thoroughly practice how they practice. And it says that they keep their own form without changing body and mind. So this is pretty clear, actually, isn't it? You be you. Mountains practice as mountains, you practice as thoroughly you. The body and mind you already have. You don't have to change your form, or change your mind, or try to be someone else. So put yourself in for the mountains. Remember, he's talking about mountains and he isn't, at the same time. And then the slander thing, don't slander by saying this can't happen. Well, in our actual practice, whom are we slandering? Right? We slander ourselves. This is a hard thing to notice, don't you think? It's an important stage in practice that we all go through and may have to go back to many, many times. You notice the conditioned mind is pretty mean to itself sometimes, right? All these beliefs in our inadequacy, depending on your condition, either everyone else is better or you're better, which is the same thing, really. It's not keeping your own place. Our self-critical mind tries to knock us off our seats. You might as well give up now. They all see how whatever you are. I'm sure you've felt that way. We all do. One of the great things about the practice of Dokusan interviews is it's a good practice to say that out loud. It actually takes some of the power out of it. Sometimes a lot of the power out of it. To say it out loud. I feel like I don't know shit. And the teachers say, oh, that's hard. Look at that conditioned mind we have, We all have. Helps us let that go. And just practice in the body and mind that we are. So don't slander yourself. That's a helpful advice, right? This is very practical. Don't slander yourself. Cut that out. And there's many layers to it, so don't slander yourself for slandering yourself either, right? Be patient. You got this way honestly. And your parents got the way they were, honestly too, right? And back and back and back it goes to beginningless time. Or the society that oppresses people like you, So many things put this into our conditioned hearts. And we're letting it bubble up, right? We can't help it. It all bubbles up in Sesshin. We're making space for it whether we like it or not. And we can be grateful for that too. Here it is. Okay, then he goes on, third paragraph, after telling us, that mountains practice thoroughly in their mountain way and don't slander them, don't misunderstand. Then he says, yet the characteristics of mountains manifest their form and life force. There is walking, there is flowing. There is a moment when a mountain gives birth to a mountain child. Because mountains are Buddha ancestors appear in this way. And this one I find maybe a little less clear. Why the yet at the beginning of that? I'm not sure. But mountains manifest their form and life force is actually kind of a repeat. There's a lot of repetition here. And that there is walking and flowing. That makes sense. Suddenly we're having a birth story, though. Well, actually, somebody, I think, was just telling me that doing this practice seriously does feel like giving birth. I've never had the opportunity to give birth myself. I've been present for some births. I know from the outside that it's really hard and somehow really wonderful. So maybe our practice is like giving birth. Giving birth to a new you, I don't know, a new mountain, or giving birth to the mountain you already were. And since this pregnancy, you can kind of, let it keep gestating forever if you want to. It's a little more tricky, You have to choose to give birth. Biology doesn't force it upon you quite so much. Maybe psychology does sooner or later. You got to let this out. The other great thing about the birth metaphor is the energy. Maybe there's encouragement here to practice enthusiastic energy, virya paramita. And it's energy beyond any idea of energy or what we can accomplish or what we're doing, just the same way this metaphor seems to read. Like, well, how's a mountain? You can give birth to a mountain. Well, it's beyond that idea. Beyond that idea. And then the last line seems pretty clear. You just put yourself in for the mountains. Because mountains are Buddha ancestors. Buddha ancestors appear in this way. Well, here we have to have the audacity to say to ourselves, because we are Buddha ancestors. Buddha ancestors appear. And this needs to be true for our tradition to continue. It can't be somebody else from before or maybe later. It's got to be us. I mean, that's something else Norman taught us, without saying that exactly. It's on us to awaken and continue the Buddha way. All this kind of mirrors the opening of Dogen's other famous essay, Genjo Koan, which we got to chant this morning. We chanted it pretty quick, so I don't know if you caught all of it, but it plants seeds, And we had to get breakfast, so we chant kind of quick. But let me remind you of the opening of Genjo Koan. This is the translation we chanted, I think. As all things are Buddha Dharma, there is delusion, realization, practice, birth and death, Buddhas and sentient beings. As all things are Buddha Dharma, there's these opposites, right? As myriad things, all things, as myriad things, are without an abiding self, there is no delusion, no realization, no Buddha, no sentient beings, no birth and death. The Buddha way, in essence, is leaping clear of abundance and lack. Thus, there is birth and death, delusion and realization, sentient beings and Buddhas. This leaping clear is interesting, huh? Leaping clear of these apparent opposites. And if you had the good fortune of being in the Red Cedar Zen 2021 Genjo Koan class on Zoom, you also have the great advantage of an image of Raisla jumping out of her desk chair. Tell us about this. Leaping clear. Helps your understanding. You have to imagine that if you weren't there. Leaping clear. You can do it, you can practice it yourself. So maybe here we hear a mirror of Qingwan's phrase about mountains were mountains at first, and then I saw the mountains were not mountains, and now I see mountains are mountains. So Buddha and me seem different, then we seem the same, then we realize none of these words are quite it. We're leaping clear of abundance and lack. We are Buddhas, and the minute we say that, we're locking down in our minds something that's not quite right, So it's okay to say that. The important thing is to feel it. This is all beyond words. And words are what we got, So we're stuck with them, happily, happily. And Norman, of course, is a big word guy, language poet. He used to also read us poetry. And my memory of Norman's poetry is, in the very early days, it kind of made sense. I'll say no more, lest I slander my teacher. So also one who liked to play with words, to push the boundaries of understanding. So actually, Rose and I saw him last Christmas time. he shared a poetry book with us, and he was saying how happy it was that it didn't make sense, but that it doesn't make sense in a good way. Can you feel it? And we promised that we would read the poems carefully and see how it felt. I'm afraid we are tardy in our homework on that. We'll get to it. Anyway, let's finish this little section. See where he goes. So he's encouraging us to practice as ourselves, to not slander ourselves, to recognize that we are already Buddhas, but that it's problematic to say it that way. There's something deeper going on here. And then he says, even if you have an eye to see mountains as grass, trees, earth, rocks, or walls, do not be confused or swayed by it. This is not complete realization. Even if there is a moment when you view mountains as the seven treasures' splendor, this is not returning to the source. Even if you understand mountains as the realm where all Buddhas practice, you're like, yeah, that sounds good, yeah. No. This understanding is not something to be attached to. Even if you have the highest understanding of mountains as all Buddha's wondrous characteristics, the truth is not only this. These are conditioned views. I imagine I'm saying my friends. These are conditioned views, my friends. This is not the understanding of Buddha ancestors, but merely looking through a bamboo pipe at a corner of the sky. So you are seeing the sky, you know. That's nice. But not the whole thing. This just follows what we were just saying, right? Enjoy your realizations and the things you kind of understand, and keep going. Right? So we can really try to hear all of this as encouragement, not discouragement. Go deeper. I love the one where he says, what does it say here? The truth is not only this. So it doesn't say you're wrong, right? It says the truth is not only this. Something bigger here. So open to that. Don't settle. Dogen was a great one. You know, sometimes uncompromising is a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. You know? So here, we want it to be a good thing, to be uncompromising in our practice. Last part. Turning circumstances and turning the mind is rejected by the great sage. Speaking of mind and speaking of essence is not agreeable to Buddha ancestors. Stinky talk. Seeing into mind and seeing into essence is the activity of people outside the way. Confined words and phrases do not lead to liberation. There is something free of all these views. That is, imagine you were listening to this for the first time, like, okay, I'm ready. That is, green mountains are always walking. Eastern mountains travel on water. Study this in detail. Oh, yes, teacher. Oh, boy. This passage reminds me of a famous Suzuki Roshi story that I got to hear from the source of. Forgive me if you've heard this one before. Blanche Hartman was an early San Francisco Zen Center person. Several of us got to practice with her, a little or a lot. Wonderful person. And she tells a story of feeling really awkward in her early years of Zen practice for various reasons, which she talks about. But especially Zazen, you know, she felt like it just, what am I doing, you know? Felt like a kind of tangled and distracted mess when the bell would ring to end the Zazen period, like, you know what I mean? But at some point, Zazen, maybe sort of suddenly, or maybe over a little while, I don't know, but Zazen started to feel easier, clearer, peaceful, you know? Yeah, that's what they were talking about. She kind of felt like she'd figured it out. So she signs up for Dokusan and goes happily off to see Suzuki Roshi about this. And as soon as he kind of got the gist of what he was saying, he interrupts her with really strong energy. Maybe angry, maybe not, but literally hollering is what she said. Raised his voice. You don't do zazen. Only zazen does zazen. And did the custom, which I don't do. There's a custom of ringing you out of the room. It means leave now. I wait till people are halfway out the door. I think it's more polite. Anyway. Imagine that, you know? And they loved this teacher. Like, it's hard to quite understand how much they loved this teacher. In some ways, created some distorted views in them. That way, it's so wholesome and beautiful. To have your beloved teacher tell you, no, you know, that's wrong. That's been a hard moment, you know. Tears were probably shed. But also a moment she kept unpacking and learning from for many years afterward. It could still feel, I could hear the aliveness of the story when I heard it from her 20 years ago, which was 20 years after it had happened. So this turning circumstances and turning the mind, right? Trying to make it happen. Trying to do this thing right. Figure it out. And the figuring out is, of course, confined, you know, limited by and limited in words and phrases. So your words and phrases do not lead to liberation. Says the Zen teacher, Dogen, who wrote many, many thousands of liberating words. And that's a choice, you know. It's a choice Dogen made. I'm going to teach with words. There are other choices available. Here's a famous Zen story, teacher in our lineage called Yao Shan from the 800s. One day, the monastery director invited the master, Yao Shan Weiyan, to deliver a Dharma talk. After the assembly had gathered, Yao Shan sat on the seat, sat in silence for a long while, then returned to his quarters and closed the door. So the director followed him and asked, Master, you agreed to give a teaching. Why did you leave? Yao Shan replied, for sutras, there are sutra masters. For treatises, there are treatise masters. For precepts, there are precept masters. That's the end of the story. So in other words, for this, silence is best, you know. For this that we're doing here. Right? Silence is best. Not the choice Dogen made, not the choice Norman made. Seems that I'm in that lineage too. Someone told me recently, your talks are always about 10 minutes too long. To this I say, yes. I used to say yes, sorry, but I've dropped the sorry. Let that go. Yes. So I got 10 more minutes, so let's see. What should we talk about? So maybe this zooming in on one section gives us something of the gist of this text, maybe, you know, at least as currently interpreted by somebody. But it all seems pretty safe, you know. Another famous Suzuki Roshi expression that always is on the tip of my tongue is, when you are you, Zen is Zen. Comes right after, you're perfect just the way you are, but I think you could use some little improvement. So being ourselves, you know, through and through. Practicing wholeheartedly, not trying to be someone or something or figure it out. Recognizing how flimsy our judgments and opinions actually are. Sesshin is a great place for intensive study of your opinions and preferences. And don't doubt the incredible reality of who we actually are, what we actually are. Don't try to define it either. Try to define it, but don't doubt it. And you may get excited from time to time and have some shift or understanding and see some little glimpse, through your bamboo tube. That's nice. Keep practicing. Listen to your teachers. Take care of your Sangha mates, which at Sesshin mostly means leave them alone. With love. Don't put another head on top of your own. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Norman. Thank you, Great Master Dogen Zenji. Let's see if we can put this into effect, whether we're here at Samish or having the even more rich retreat practice of being at home. It's a great retreat practice. You have the harder job. Good luck, guys. Yeah. Keep the